All right, guys, welcome, welcome. Tonight we're gonna talk about. I'm gonna be running a video that's gonna break down medicine and the use of medicine and bush tea. So, guys, just stay tuned, watch the video, and to the end of the video, we can do some discussion. All right.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on this series, Bush Tea, Herbs, Plants, and Botanical Stories of Barbados. I'm Aisha Gibson Gill, and this is a production of the National Cultural Foundation.
Have you ever thought of vitamins and
Yes,
supplements to
Mr.
support
John,
better
let's
health?
go.
Well, today we meet with herbalist Everton Heru Holligan to discuss the good life, and after that, we'll explore the transformation of bush tea.
Greetings. My name is Heru. I am a health and wellness consultant who've been practicing for just about 20 years, maybe a little bit more than 20 years. I started off a company called Chemic Connections, where we sold herbs and consulted with people to help them achieve wellness. That emerged over the years to Healing Earth Life Products, which the acronym is HELP, of course. And so we are at Healing Earth Life Products now, my main office, where I do see clients and help them to achieve wellness through utilizing natural therapies, natural modalities, as well as the herbs and vitamins and supplements. I also do manufacturing here, as well as offer massage therapy and other types of therapies.
Okay, so wrapped up in the name of your company, Healing Earth, is a bit of a hint about your philosophy and your outlook on how we interact with things on the physical plane. Can you talk a bit more about why Healing Earth, why herbs?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of what I do now has emerged out of a growing awareness of Africa, our culture and heritage, something that was technically left out of our basic schooling. And because that was left out of our basic schooling, and when I stumbled upon the information about who we are, our culture, our heritage, and how we lived prior to our being captured and enslaved as African people in this hemisphere. And I started to put all the nuts and bolts together of what we should be doing, how we should be doing things. I began this unlearning process where I had to unlearn everything and relearn everything. And in the midst of that unlearning and relearning came health, which fell right in my lap. So it's like we have to see our bodies in a different light. We have to treat our bodies in a different way than we've been conditioned to treat or taught to treat it. And so just as much as our history and culture haven't been taught to us, aspects of our wellness, about our healing, hasn't been taught to us. And then our spiritual concepts that we used to use before took into consideration all of the major elements: earth, air, fire, water. And so the earth component became essential when we had to go back to the plants then to see how we can heal some of these challenges that we've picked up in the Western Hemisphere. So healing is essential. I've always said we don't have enough healers. I loved listening to stories from my granny and my great-grand and my grandfather when they talk about the different things they used to do back in the days. The fact that my first son was born at home, and my auntie, bless her soul, my son was born in her house, and she was so afraid because we've went ahead and did this crazy thing to decide to give birth at home, and she didn't even realize that she too was birthed at home. So when I said to her, "But auntie, do you know where you were born?" She said, "The hospital." I was like, "No, you were born at home." So you had generations of people, generations of knowledge that was using these different modalities, these natural ways of living, the herbs around them, etc. And so the Healing Earth came to me with me and myself, my family first, trying to reconnect to something more significant and trying to understand how do we think, how do we eat, how do we live, what religion do we use, what philosophy do we use. So trying to put it all together. And so Healing Earth Life, and then I had to produce the products to kind of complement that. So at least I'm not just talking about things and I don't see them or can't send people to where they need to get them. So then the products came right into play. So we're here to help.
So you're here to help.
We're here to help.
Haru, you've told us a lot about your journey with Healing Earth like products, and that you had to have products in order
Yes.
to walk the walk that you were talking.
Right.
But this is your actual own brand. What were some of the motivations behind actually manufacturing your own
Right.
herbs and herbal formulas rather than perhaps,
Just getting others.
distributing others
Yeah.
and counseling people on the use?
Well, there's several layers to that. The first one we could refer to is the looking at Megafood and looking at the specific things in Megafood and making sure that it's safe and it meets well with our philosophy in healing. I was trained by a doctor who was very, very focused on ethnomedicine, making sure that there's enough emphasis and attention being placed on the fact that we are treating people within our community with a specific biochemical makeup, so intentionally pulling apart herbs and formulations and stuff to pay attention to the fact that we're tropical people, our diets are like this, and then here's how these herbs would work better. And so obviously in the bigger community in the USA and those other bigger places, the domination of those markets are not our people. And so when wanting to put together formulas that would gel well with what we were taught, I started to say, self-empowerment, which is an essential part to it. Let me just go ahead and start creating. Then there is also the other component to manufacturing, which is to not use additives and preservatives and putting the formulas together. Almost any formula you buy is going to have fillers in it. And the fillers, we learned after a while that the fillers are there to help with lubrication of the machinery. So when you see a formula and it has the herbs and it has this additional stuff on the bottom, that's really from machine lubrication so that the machinery can stuff all these capsules really quickly without clogging the machine.
You weren't referring to the body machine. I thought you meant the lubrication of the machine.
The lubrication
you
of
mean the manufacturing
machine.
Okay.
So part of what we wanted is to establish our brand that's free of those additives and those fillers. So we do our own manufacturing process, which is a slower manufacturing process to preserve the integrity of the formulas. So apart from making sure that one, we can serve our ethnic population well with the formulations that we put together, and then making sure that we can have access to the formulas that we need, and also self-empowerment, knowing full well that I created this and I could adjust it to suit the person that I'm dealing with, and I can track as well based on the responses that the person have, and I would know exactly how to alter it if I need to.
So that hence was kept. How long have you been manufacturing this?
It's about 22 years. 22 years, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. We're here in the pharmacopoeia now at Healing Earth Life Products. And we can see two major brands here on display. You have your Casimou and you have your Megafood. Can you explain to us which is yours and which is the other one and why you carry both brands?
Sure. So Casimou Herbal Essentials is the name of the brand. Casimou is the name of my first son, and it's a West African term. It means keeper of the forest. And so it basically, when we were branding, we were creating the concept, the model, and then of course taking into consideration the longevity that you want to see unfold from putting your business into place. I tied my first son to what we were doing. And so it's called Casimou Herbal Essentials. Of course, this brand is the individual herbs, because you have people who just want individual things. I just want some burdock, I want some aloe, I want some moringa, and that's it. This one is capsulized. All of it, we don't sell everything capsulized. We have some that you can just buy in bulk.
Mm-hmm.
Capsules in herbal medicine is used to help hide the taste, but also control dosage. And so this is why we have them here capsulized, but you can also get stuff bulk. Megafood, in the quest to figure out how to nourish the children as they grew, we wanted healthy vitamins for them, and we found this company that didn't put all the sugars and additives and stuff, which is kind of right along our lifestyle. And so we built the relationship with the company, and now we're the distributor for their brand. So they provide us with the things that we don't use because we don't have the manufacturing capacity to create the supplements and the vitamins. So that's what we do. And we merge the supplements and the vitamins with the herbs to help accomplish the healing that is required or desired. Yes.
So we're going to take just a short trip over to this side.
Mm-hmm. This is the Casimu formulas now.
Right, which is separate from the finite herbs.
Yes, just the individual herbs, correct.
So one of the things that was interesting, we noticed when we walked in, was one of the first things that caught my eye, because I'm a woman. I saw the womb wellness blend, and then I realized there was woman tea, and then I saw feminine energy, and then I saw, hormone balance, and I went, if you're responding to some of the frequencies that you're saying earlier, we were talking about you responding to making the medications that happen to heal or address the problems that you're seeing frequently. Mm-hmm. What's going on? And then I will ask you a follow-up question about, you're a man, mm-hmm. and you're dealing with all of these things. So, but what's happening that we have these blends so much?
It could unfold in different ways. I mean, I'll take this route first. Women are very important to the society. Women are very important to the household. Things fall apart when women are falling apart. They keep everything rolling. And so they also understand that responsibility that they have to the household, to the children, to the community, to the work environment. Wherever you go, you see that as the major dynamic. And so they have to make sure and protect and defend themselves. So they are oftentimes more quicker to seek out alternative ways to prevent disease and to protect the body, because they know they can't afford. It's like a small business owner. You cannot afford to be sick. You have to be there, otherwise you're going to lose out on your revenue. So in some instances that can be one layer. But there's also the fact that women are very proactive in making sure they can protect and defend their bodies. And because of the dynamics of the female anatomy, of course, the transition, every month something is happening, right? And in that month, it also raises awareness of all the other minor things that may be going on. And women tend to not let it slide. They tend to want to go out there and fix it. And they'll come to the herbs or pharmaceutical drugs to try to fix those challenges. So yes, there is an increase of issues within our communities with the reproductive system of men and of women, but because again, of the complexity of the female reproductive system, you tend to have this proliferation of growths and cystic tumors, fibroids, which I've again learned that it's across wherever we are in the diaspora. You will find issues with fibroids. It was 1 in every 3 Black women in societies that usually would show up with them. And then there's all the other things, the endometriosis, the PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, heavy menstrual cramping or painful menstrual cramping. And so, yes, I get the opportunity to learn a lot about the female anatomy as I sit with my female clients, women clients on a daily basis. Also helps me to appreciate more that feminine side of myself and also to understand the dynamics of what women are going through. So with the monthly menstrual cycle and all the different complexities, we've decided that, let's put this together, and we do have a large female clientele. So it makes sense to satisfy the clientele.
Do you have, or did you have in your journey, I know you've had mentors and teachers, mm-hmm. Specifically women mentors and teachers who would help you to, not just reading the book to figure out what to put in the formula, but talk to you about the entire therapeutic process.
Right. So well-known traditional healer in the USA, Queen Afua, I came up under her and her institution. Mama Naya is another one who is a Trinidadian. She's of Trinidadian heritage, and she came up under Dr. Sebi as well, or she worked with Dr. Sebi. So I worked with her for a few years in New York. And so those are the 2 main people that I can pinpoint. But my main instructor, teacher, mentor was Laila Africa, and he was very versed in the many dynamics of the human anatomy and the body. So I got to understand. And through the practice, the year-to-year practice, you get to learn more as you engage with your clients. So who are my greatest teachers?
Your clients.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And just, if we're going with the formula of looking at mm-hmm. what your formulae are and kind of trying to extrapolate
what are the things that are affecting the Barbadian population, or at least this population that is coming for the herbal formulae. So now I'm seeing Green Food Plus. What would something like this be for?
Right. So the Green Food Plus is one of the essential things. You've heard a lot about Dr. Sebi, and he was a giant in his time. The Green Food Plus is one of those foods to work with alkaline in the body, helping to get oxygen to the cells. Unfortunately, we don't eat as much greens because we're culturally taught to eat the starches as the predominant part of our diet. And even as you grow up, you would have a bowl of starch and then some vegetables sprinkled on the side and then some meat and gravy. So a lot of starch consumption is devoid of nourishment, enough minerals and vitamins to carry your body and make it function efficiently. So Green Food Plus would be like a food-based multivitamin. It has things like spinach and kale and chlorella and spirulina.
So again, you've connected it back to the living and the lifestyle, because we're starch heavy, we're not eating the bush.
Correct.
And so inflammation, I walked in, somebody came in, did you have something for sinuses?
Right.
Is this also something that you get a lot of, that you?
Yes, and again, there are other factors, but the starch is very contributory to the excess mucus that is dumped into the sinus cavity as well. So we have systems that we use and protocols that we use for most diseases. So it's not really just the fibroid formula that a person may have to take if they having issues with fibroid growth. We may want to encourage them to do a full body detox, cleanse the body, which means you're taking time away from your standard diet and focusing your energy on a lighter diet, which is very rich in nutrients, mostly fruits and vegetables, or exclusively fruits and vegetables, for a period of time. That can be 14 days, 28 days, or even 3 months, depending on the ailment that the person is presenting with. Now, this is how we get our clients to a balanced state that they now can then further assess the symptoms that they're having. Now, say a person comes in and say, I'm diabetic, I want diabetic formula. I don't necessarily say, okay, yes, buy the diabetes formula and take it. I would want to talk to that person. I want to figure out what their diet is. I want to know how they're eating, what they're eating, but I also want to speak to them about making those adjustments. I want to know what their numbers are. So it's a lot of clinical stuff that you have to then learn to be able to apply the herbs in a way that is suitable for people who are now coming from your doctors, because everyone is coming from the doctor, and you have to be able to translate that information and then help them to feel comfortable in the process of using the herbs to get to where they want to go. So if they're taking a diabetes formula, I may want them to, you know what, why don't you take some time away from certain foods? Let's do the 14-day detox, whether it's a woman or man. Clean the body up, give the body a chance to feel balanced. And usually, depending on the severity of the condition, by the time they finish the 14 days of just fruits and vegetables and the detox kit, the symptoms are gone or significantly diminished.
So there's a system.
There's a system.
I'm coming off of pharmaceuticals, and the herbs is all hairy-fairy, and there's definitely
there's a system.
A system in
for sure.
A lot of learning to do.
Yes, and again, I want to reiterate, it's not a matter of just putting this down to pick that up. In some instances, that's fine. Like for example, with the Mega Food, there is a blood builder that we have, which in some instances, if you're having issues with iron levels and the pharmaceutical grade iron is causing constipation, we know this will cause constipation, and we know it's very effective to bring the iron levels up in a short period of time as well. Part of also working with women is we do a lot. We had a midwife in our center who used to consult with women here, and we also work with women as their as doulas. So as far as pregnancy, nurturing them through that whole process. So some of our formulas, like the Woman Tea, is put together for a woman who is giving birth, who has a baby, so she can take that tea all throughout pregnancy, when she gives birth, and even after, to help her to strengthen the uterus and to be prepared for the baby.
So we've talked a lot about women but also because it did catch my eye. What are some of the things that is it that there are more general issues that you find with men that are more general to the population, like the NCDs, or are there specific things that you're seeing frequently, or is it that they don't come to the doctor as often?
Well, there is the cultural understanding that men don't reach out as fast as or as quick as when they have a little something happening. They tend to prolong and delay treatment processes. There is that, but there are some men who go out there and try to fix it. But again, the women, because of the complexity of the reproductive system, because of the changes that's happening every month, they're more in tune with what's changing, what's happening, and are more compelled to act on it. We don't have a visual cycle. We do have a cycle, but it's not visual. We don't, so we just continue to function. So we do have issues in our society with men, and they're the standard NCDs: hypertension, diabetes, erectile dysfunction, which is very gender specific for men, which is the major, connected to the circulation, the hypertension, and the diabetes.
Okay.
So a lot of that is around in our society. Constipation is a big deal. That's why we have the supracolon cleanse. It's very effective to keep the bowel functioning. So men do come. They don't come as often as women. But when they do come and they are consistent and they get the results that they're looking for, particularly driven by the erectile dysfunction.
Yes, but that's a symptom of some other underlying thing, so you get to treat everything.
Yes.
Rather than just the quote unquote gender binary, which of course it's a spectrum. Let's think about what about age? Because when you were talking about, I was reminded of the initiation ceremonies that happen in so many traditional societies, where going from one physical and mental stage is marked physically and spiritually.
Yes.
So as you were saying, because we don't mark those rites of passage, we also don't have the passing on of pockets of knowledge of how to eat, how to dress, how to be, how to wear. Not telling you exactly what to do, but getting you to understand that you're a cycle. A tree is a sapling, and then it's a big tree. With our youth, from babies to youth, do you find things there too that you create specific formulas for different stages of life?
Yes, we do. We definitely do, and we encourage parents to be considerate of their children, even when they make their own transitions. So you would find a parent is saying, "I'm going to eat better. I'm going to start drinking more water. I'm going to exercise," but oftentimes we don't bring the children along enough. And so they would still be, okay, well, I have to still prepare this for him or her.
Yes, he's still licking hot dogs and nuggets while I'm eating my vegetables.
And I talk about that a lot. Actually, it becomes the major initiation for me in dealing with clients who need to transition, but they haven't the hiccups for transitioning. And I kind of connect the fact that they have to practice things that the children would see them practicing, and then the children would then take on those habits. So then I would inform them that a lot of what you're doing is you're not doing it for you anymore. You're doing it for you being able to create the best of yourself, because that's what you are here for, to recreate the best of yourself. But if you don't take on these habits early enough that your children can grow up and see them, then obviously they're going to take on other habits that would bring them back to that NCD state or that state of dis-ease even earlier than it visited you. Because there's a degeneration process throughout our generation. Now, the transformation, or with the rites of passage, as we call it, is essential. So when we have young toddlers, there's some things that a breastfed child should not do, that a toddler would do. And then things that a 8-9-year-old would do that the toddler shouldn't do. So even in communication with parents, you can't just set a plate with everything for everybody to eat at different stages and at different ages. So you have to be aware of how to adjust based on the activity level of the person, the age they're at, their digestive ability, right? And then how they're going to cope with dealing with the challenges with the body, because you can't give a child medication, so we have to give it to the mother so she can breastfeed. Not medication, herbs, certain herbs. So certain herbs we can prescribe for the mother, so when she breastfeeds, the child can get it.
The benefits of them,
right?
But metabolized through her system.
Correct.
In a way that they can access it.
Correct.
Safely.
Correct.
So because I was looking here and I saw Alpha Teens and then Kids Daily. And I went, okay, so you're definitely looking at cycles and passages and different.
You have to, because there are different needs at different times of your life, and this is why we say for the elderly people, it's best not to consume those heavy foods that you grew up consuming, because you're not as active as you used to be. Your digestive system is 60 years old, 70 years old, and it has a lot of wear and tear, and it's not as efficient as a young 15-year-old or a 20-year-old. So that is essential in any healing circle. Bringing that person into a state of awareness of where they're at so that they can then choose the best approach for their wellness.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. We're going to take a break because we want to see you making some things, yes, in the lab.
Okay.
I'd like to make a toast to friendship and to gratitude.
This is our very own local moringa that was dried and ground and then encapsulated here at Healing Earth Life Farms.
One of the things you mentioned is that particularly these, which are the individual herbs, are in capsules to help with dosage. Some of the questions that people tend to have, particularly about quote unquote natural medications and the herbs, is, well, how do you account for quality control and standards? So we might have a standardized unit of, that there's X number of ounces or milligrams of a particular herb, but how do I know that a milligram today has in the same amount of bioactive agents as a milligram tomorrow? So your weights are standard, or your liquid formula standard. So how do you address those concerns?
One, it's not a pharmaceutical drug.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in the rest of the world, they try to apply pharmaceutical standards to traditional standards or traditional healing. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, because now you're asking traditional healers, you're basically shutting them out in the market of being able to provide healing for their communities. Because now they have to have lab equipment, they have to have infrastructure set up in place to help say that this is specifically this or this is specifically that. The good thing about herbs is that for the large majority of them, they are safe. And the ones that we use are the ones that are tried and tested and studied and documented and are safe for consumption. And so they're not going to have any major adverse effects or any adverse effects. So the standardization demands on the industry sometimes is overwhelming for the industry, because we can't do what a big, huge pharmaceutical company would do, but we're asked to do the same thing in some cases. So the goal now is you build your relationships with your clientele. That's really what the true healing is. And building relationships with the clientele ensures now that you know the reaction in the body, because you can't control the growing of the plants. You can't control the environment they're growing. You don't know if the soil is depleted or not. And you can't literally take every opportunity you have to test every single plant substance that you have to ensure that the active ingredients are the same. It would literally close the industry down. So definitely there is a standard disclaimer that is put in the process of dealing with herbs, which is not recognized as a drug. And if you think of it, aloe is a food. Do you ask about the standardization of your apples? Are you sure you're getting enough vitamin C in your apples that you buy? Or the cherries that we grow up here? Is there a standard amount of vitamin C you get? Do you check the soil in which the cherries grow in? So this is a food, but with medicinal therapies, medicinal qualities.
So it goes back to what you spoke of earlier when you said you have not quite a cognitive dissonance, but you have a contention within your own understanding of healing, that it shouldn't and it can't expand on the commercial scale the way that we think.
Correct.
Western capitalist paradigm is about scaling up, because healing is such an intimate community thing where you're tracking and they're not your patient, they're somebody who you're tracking your charge through their life, through the journey, and therefore you're saying, they take it if they have to take 2 capsules, etc.
Right, because and again, unique beings. So one person may not work well with 2 capsules and they up it to 4. Some people can't do 4, they have to do 2. And so you always try to build your relationship enough so you can track and manage your clientele.
So again, we're talking about community,
Correct.
communing, communication. So it's food. Food is your medicine. Medicine is your food. But
medicine is your food.
food is social.
Right.
So everything.
So I think part of the challenge with us in this hemisphere and being able to create our own pharmacopoeia of herbs and stuff is that having the capacity to handle the standardized growing of the plants, the standardized testing before it goes to market, and the cost factors in that would literally wipe up the market and the clientele wouldn't be able to afford it.
Okay, thank you.
And now a spot of good old Bajan bush tea, but as you have never seen it.
Please introduce yourselves by name and the name of your company.
My name is Jacqueline Cumberbatch, and I am one of the co-directors of Heritage Teas of Barbados.
My name is Sonia Peter, and I am also one of the founding directors of Heritage Teas Barbados.
One of our other founding co-directors, who is Andrea Fleming, Andrea and myself, we had come up with the idea of preparing some teas, and we had done some trial runs, and we had gotten good response. And then we met Sonia. And after meeting Sonia, four of us, so it's four of us as directors. So it's Andrea, it's Sharina, Sonia, and myself. We then decided to come together and form a separate company. And that company is Heritage Teas of Barbados.
From my perspective, I've been working within the interface of what we call phytochemistry, where we look for the value in plants, and also heritage conservation, where we try to let our population understand the value of our plants and then demonstrate how we can even add more value to them. So Jacqueline and Andrea heard about me working in that perspective and thought that I would offer some great background. But as soon as we met, something clicked, and we understood that collectively we had a responsibility to take the concept of that tea tradition in Barbados to the public in terms of offering a commercial entity, which would allow us at the same time to demonstrate that our heritage has value.
Can you elaborate on that tea tradition in Barbados? Because people are thinking, I don't remember the scientific name, sinensis thing, but talk to us about when you and Andrea trialed the teas. Why was it that you trialed these? Was it nostalgia? So elaborate on Barbadian tea tradition that you decided to commodify and commercialize.
Well, yes, Andrea and myself, we had recognized that there were not a lot of mixed teas being served in Barbados. You could get soursop on its own, you could get bay leaf on its own, but we decided, well, let us do a mixture. So we started out with bay leaf and something else, and we would do moringa and mint. And so then that took us to Barbadian tradition. And Andrea said, well, you know, back in the day, that is how Barbadians used to use the teas. They would go outside, they would pick the leaves, they would steep them, they would boil them, and they would drink them. And that is one of the reasons that our foreparents lived so long and did not have any of the NCDs that unfortunately we are fighting with today.
Yes, and I appreciated what Jackie and Andrea brought to me. And then from my perspective, I always remember my grandmother, who was someone steeped in Barbadian tradition. She was a true Barbadian. She was able to whip up anything within the culinary field that fell under Barbadian tradition. I remember her drying her orange peel in the ceiling. I remember her having her enamel cup with her tea on evenings. It had to be with a slice of our coconut bread. And in the back of my mind, those things fueled me to find out more. Even though I was working within the scientific domain, I recognized that the heritage was also of value. And when we formed the company, we came up with the slogan that sipping a cup of heritage tea is like sipping on tradition. And I think that our company really does embody the best of both worlds. We are a model small business on the island, and we are capturing our heritage and tradition and offering up that to a wider public.
So both of you, Jackie and Dr. Peter, you were sorry, Jackie Lang. You took us through that journey and how it's connected to nostalgia, but you've been expanding. I see that you have merchandise, you have cups, you're talking about things that you are looking to do in the future with packaging. Can you, not to give out the company secrets, but can you perhaps elaborate and give not a wish list, but a focused strategy in the future for how you're looking to market, position, distribute, and kind of brand these teas in Barbados, but as well regionally in the rest of the world, some of the plans that you might be having?
Well, we can start by saying that through the BIDC in 2019, we were invited to take part in a trade fair in Trinidad. And Andrea and Sharina, they were able to attend that and to showcase our teas. So that was one of the first events that outside of Barbados that we were able to showcase our teas. But we really and truly officially launched in April of 2018 at an event that was coordinated by the Center for Food Security and Entrepreneurship. And that was our first big outing. And we got really good response from that. And so from that, we started then to build on how we can continue to market our teas. We have taken part in different exhibitions and in different trade fairs. And Dr. Peter last year attended a tea show in the United States, and she is going to now share a bit about that.
Yeah, so as I said, we really do understand our position in terms of offering views on Barbados from a commercial perspective and a heritage perspective. So we were offered the opportunity to take part in the World Tea Expo that was held in Las Vegas in 2019. And this is an expo that has a very broad global reach. Every year, that tea expo brings all of those persons that are in the tea business together. And it also has quite a large following. Thousands of persons actually travel to the World Tea Expo. And so we were in the midst of these very seasoned stakeholders in the tea business. And it was quite exciting. Though we were only there to display our product, we got good reviews to the point to where the organizers recognized our potential and actually pleaded with us that when next we come back to the expo, they want us to actually bring Barbados with us. They want us to bring our Barbados culture. They want us to develop a tour around tea. Now, we're not a tea island, if you want to put it that way. They're the big players that make what we call the green tea, have these fantastic tours all over the world. But I think that we have a different type of offering built around the tradition of tea, built around our indigenous plants, built around our green spaces, and other elements of our culture that we can put together an exciting tour based around our tea. And that was extremely fulfilling.
All these expos are you want to go and see everybody else's display, but you also have to be at your booth. But did you get any opportunities to perhaps meet North African in particular, or East African, or even West African people who were doing the non-Chinese Indian tea, or even then that there was some sort of commonality in the aesthetic? Is it gendered? Is it medicinal?
Yeah.
Do you have tea? We give cooling teas to children. So did you find any of those interesting connections?
Yeah, it was quite fascinating, actually. As you said, you were torn between wanting to be a spectator and also to be highlighting your product for persons passing through. But understanding that the organizers set aside a day where you could become immersed in the life of tea. And there were these fascinating workshops where you could sit and be taken into all the other areas of the world where persons are developing tea product. And it was so exciting to see the crafting of the tea. We think about green tea, but there's so many versions based on how you treat the tea leaves, when you pick the tea leaves, and the general tradition of how you store them and process them. And we were exposed to all of that. So wherever tea is big in the world, we were taken on that tour, and it was exciting to see the process of production and also how heritage was a big part of it. Because whenever they took us to a tea destination, they made sure to take us back to the community, the village, to talk about where the plants grow, the type of soil, the type of elevation, and what it means, the tea ceremony. We may not have a designated tea ceremony, but the act of sitting with a friend, with a family, on an evening in your veranda, that is common. We found that across all of the tea cultures.
Do other people have tea with some? We know about the British teas and the lemons with the cucumbers, but you mentioned your grandmother with the tea and the sweet bread.
Yeah.
And I know with us, it's either tea and sweet bread or tea and a dry biscuit.
Yeah.
Something about that combination.
Mm-hmm.
So do other people have those combinations in either of your experiences out of Barbados with the
You want
tea?
to talk about the French?
Well, the French are not tea drinkers, French or coffee. So they're not really into tea in the same way that us as, with a British history are into tea. So it's, they may take tea, but it's not a big thing. They don't have a tea tradition.
Yeah. I found that the other cultures, there's a spiritual side to having that cup of tea. So it's almost that you would adulterate the process if you introduce other elements. It's all about sitting quietly. It's about even pouring the tea has a religious feeling to it. The way you cup the tea is important. The way you raise it to your lips is important. And the general, reverence you have for the moment. So many of those cultures have such deep connection, which I think, unfortunately, because we have been fragmented, we have lost a lot of that spirituality. But I think that the more we do things like this, unearth the importance and let our public reconnect, that we will regrow our culture.
To be free and flexible and creative was really essential to what I wanted to make, and I didn't find a platform that did that other than Wix.
Aisha, I want you to have a taste of our Bay Cafe. As I mentioned before, we did taste testing of all of our formulations until we thought we had the right profile. Mm-hmm. So in the Bay Cafe, our major note is the bay leaf. That's our note that you should smell. Then after that is going to be the soursop, which is a little more muted with a hint of bitterness.
And that's the bitterness that makes me think of dark chocolate.
Yes, that's right. And then we follow that with cinnamon, which is always a punch. That aroma makes everything smell better. And we end with that hint of coffee, which we think just blends everything together. So as you sample this, you're going to want to not have good manners. You're going to have to slurp that so that all of the flavor profile bounces off your palate.
See, Mommy, she told me to slurp.
Okay, so please take a sample and tell me what you get. Run it around. Do you get the bay leaf?
At the end, yes, the aromatic, it hits.
At the
It
back
hits
of
like
the
a smell
palate.
at the back of the palate.
There you go.
The bitter
Because
was
you know
the
you
first
eat
one.
as well. The aroma and what's happening in your nasal cavity is part of your enjoyment. Do you get the soursop? That little hint of bitterness?
But it really makes it taste like dark chocolate without the acid notes from the dark chocolate.
Yes.
And it's a very pleasant bitter, but I like bitter.
Right.
So it's not one of those bitters that makes
Overpowering.
your mouth go.
Yes, that you don't want this. And then the cinnamon is going to give you a sweet note, and the coffee just adds richness.
It's rich and mellow. Okay, so
You can talk to her.
So there you have it, Bay Cafe.
All right, guys, here we go again with another episode of Bush Tea Medicine. We got to shout out to NCF Barbados. I do not have the rights to this video, so I got to shout out to them. The good thing about this is I'm also trying to highlight these people and their tradition, because we lost a lot of these tradition. And the honest truth is, for what I noticed Barbados kind of hold on to this tradition, this herbal medicine, this bush tea. I think Barbados really hold on to this thing for as a Caribbean island. I'm not saying every island not still doing it, but I think Barbados promoting it on another level. And they take, so by me doing this, it's not my video, but by me doing this is also help giving an exposure to these people that with all this culture still continuing. It's such a blessing, man. It's such a blessing to able to, look at when they was talking about the tea. How it's a certain way you got to hold the tea. It's a spiritual way how you carry it up to your mouth. I mean, wow. But see, we lost from these things. So these things kind of bring back the culture of these people. So this is why I kind of highlight them, because I really do believe that they have some interesting thing to teach. I don't know if you guys are available, but I'm going to run another video where they're going to be talking about herbs. So I'm going to run it. It's up to you guys, but I'm going to run this video as well. All right.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this
Scene. Oh, sorry for that, guys. Yeah, Fifi. Yes, they're big. That's what I'm saying. They're really big on herbs. So I'm trying, like you say, I wonder how they're, yes. But if they're so big on herbs, you hearing me? If they're so big on herbs, it should be, the health should be on another level. All right. So, okay, guys, I'm going on run this other video.
series, Bush Tea, Herbs, Plants, and Botanical Stories of Barbados. I'm Aisha Gibson Gill, and this is a production of the National Cultural Foundation. Greetings, I'm Aisha Gibson Gill, Cultural Officer at the National Cultural Foundation, and thank you for joining us on our series about Barbadian plants and herbs. We're here in the fantastic Sage Gardens with Miss Holly Bino, and she is going to introduce us to this space that is so full of energy and food.
Hi, my name is Holly Bino. and I'm one of the co-directors of Sage Garden Barbados, which is located in Turner's Hall, St. Andrew. My partner, Sharita Olsen, and I received this land as a part of the FEED initiative, which is under the BADMC, which is controlled by the Ministry of Agriculture. We were granted 6 acres in 2019, and we've just started to develop the landscape. And one of the first things that we noticed when we came to this space is the fact that it is very dry and that the topography is very much unlike the rest of Barbados. So when people think about Barbados, they think about flat land, they think about, really, really sort of pastoral landscapes. But in the Scotland district, it is a little bit of an anomaly where you have high elevation, and thus within an agricultural scheme, we're also prone to slippage on the landscape. So one of the things that BADMC and the FEED and Soil, the conservation unit here in St. Andrew, what they did for us was terrace the land, which means that within the 6 acres, we have 3 roads that sort of taper off, which would be used to prevent soil erosion. Of course, even though we're going through the worst drought since 1947, when the rains do end up coming, there's a lot of slippage that happens in this area, and thus we wanted to secure our investment. So not only are we looking to figure out how to terrace appropriately and how to build different things on these terraces or grow different things on these terraces, we're also thinking about grasses and about different ways to reinforce the soil so that when we develop crops, when we grow crops, we would be able to have that reinforcement so that we don't lose our food and our medicine. Essentially, through our mission, it is for healing, but it's also for reconfiguring how we think about our history. So we've lost a lot of our indigenous seeds, and we don't know much about the crops or seeds that propagated our landscape prior. So one of the elements that we're trying to do is to investigate and to develop our own seed bank here so that we could have a resource for food when things like COVID happen and we're moving through very vulnerable water regarding food security. I'm really grateful to be here, and it's a very special land that we're standing on. Before we move forward, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestors, the people who came before. Without them, we would not be standing here, and we would not know how important it is to resuscitate our food and our medicine. Sage Garden is located in Turner's Hall in St. Andrew, and we recently got the land last year, and we were able to get 6 acres. And Sharita and I, we sat down early last year just throwing dreams out. We want some land. We want to move back to a more natural space. We want to be able to heal ourselves and bring an offering to society. And Sage Garden popped up, and with it, the attempt to reconnect in really seminal ways to the landscape by healing our womb. As people of color and as Black women, we understand that colonization and the various systems that we're under have poisoned us, not only our bodies, but also our psyche. So we've removed ourselves from the power and the innate energy of the landscape. So this project is attempting to maintain and build Barbadian food security, but also in a very, very deep way, thinking about how we come back to this indigenous knowledge, to this knowledge that has been lost to us, but a knowledge that is within the bloodline. So when we began to conceptualize the plan, and what you'll probably see is bare ground with some food, but we have big plans. We have big plans because we need to do big work with regards to how we are manifesting our presence. So when we speak about healing, what are we speaking about when we say we want to heal, Aisha? We don't have all of the answers. Right. So this space is also about opening up to elders, to community knowledge, to that knowledge that has been passed on through farming practices here in Barbados to reignite a space, to create a space that can connect back to the power of the center of us. And it is, in many ways, unformed, it's intangible. It's something that a lot of people would think is esoteric, but as we move on, it really becomes very tangible. Our association with growing, with seed keeping, with remembering, and with using this medicine. And a lot of this knowledge is sacred.
So we're going to have a conversation now with Dr. Damien Kohal and Holly Bino here in Sage Gardens about, well, just there's so much to talk about in this space. We talked about food security and herbal medicines and food and indigenous ways of knowing and being and the evolution of connection.
Thanks again for the invitation to be a part of this wonderful program on cultural practices, especially as it pertains to medicinal plants. You know, as I listened to Ollie earlier, I couldn't not highlight two important points that she mentioned. And, you know, she mentioned our ancestors and the role our ancestors had in, you know, the reintroduction of practices, which of course would have been captured within their space that they were brought from to be a part of this new ecosystem, you know, in the new world. The other important part is the spiritual component that tied in with the practices. And, you know, as I stand in this beautiful space, which is very natural in its own being, I'm identifying all types of different plants. I'm seeing shrubs, I'm seeing herbs, I'm seeing trees. But what I'm also getting, looking at the natural land of the topography, as an academic, I'm also feeling this spiritual element that would have been around and would have played a significant role in these practices. Now, previously, I would have mentioned the importance of ancestors and the impact that ancestors would have had towards developing these practices within Barbados and the Caribbean. And of course, when we speak about ancestors, we tend to focus on our West African ancestors and persons who were also brought from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean during the 16th to the 19th century during the period of slavery. But I also want to highlight our indigenous people from this side of the world, right, from the western side of the world. And I also want to highlight the influences which came in during that period, during the period of indentured laborers from East India, China, among other places. Now, from a historical standpoint, it's important to understand that the practices which were brought to Barbados were strongly influenced by the disease profile of the land in the 16th, 17th century. You know, we have moved away from a space of infectious conditions to currently this space where we are suffering from chronic diseases.
Yes.
But in the 16th century, conditions that we had to deal with were primarily infectious: yellow fever, typhoid, cholera, all sorts of different infectious conditions which were related to bacteria, viruses, and fungi. And if you look at the practices of medicinal plants in terms of the development of poultice, development of extracts, aqueous extracts, development and use of other forms of herb in our day-to-day life, it is all tied in with the indigenous knowledge which came in through the practice of the use of these various shrubs, herbs, plants to cure these ailments. If you look at the number of plants and the types of conditions which they are touted to use, for example, highlighting in Barbados outside of the Caribbean, we hear a lot about the cooling teas or the cooling bush teas of Barbados. And, you know, I had the opportunity to have a very frank, open discussion with some of the elders, the persons who would have learned this important practice from their ancestors and have been passing it on to the younger generations. And cooling in Barbados could stem to two important practices. However, if you were to leave it up to the elders, they will tell you that cooling itself was primarily due to mood changes. Cooling teas were used primarily by, again, mothers, you know, for children who suffered from colic. Now, colic is a very interesting condition, right? It is said that the etiology of colic is still uncertain, but it influences mood changes in the young. and cooling bush teas were given to babies and youngsters to assist with mood changes or modulating mood changes, which would essentially calm the child down, or within local colloquial terms, cool the child down, cooling teas. But as a scientist, I can tell you that cooling also could reflect antipyretic activities. What does that mean? To cool the body temperature down. And again, as I started, a lot of the herbal practices that we had in the Caribbean were essentially towards infectious conditions. And as we know, that when we get an infection, one of the natural effects or symptoms associated with getting an infection is the increase in body temperature. We call it a fever, right? Paresis. And the cooling teas would have an important role in one, assisting the immune system to fight that infection, which could assist in lowering our body temperature, or it could have a direct effect at that infectious agent, which would essentially allow for the cooling of the body, lowering the body temperature.
Now, Dr. Kohal, just because I don't want to lose the thought, you're highlighting a really interesting thing, that there would have been a move in the practice of what types of plants you were looking for to deal with what types of diseases, because you were dealing with the present day through time. And it reminds me of something that you mentioned earlier, Holly, when you said one of the first things you did when you came to be in stewardship of the land was you let the land show you what it was that came up. So that is going to be directly tied to what's in the soil fallow when it's not being used agriculturally. What pops up can kind of give you almost like archaeological clues of what people were using, even if it wasn't directly cultivated, although a lot of it seems to have been. What we consider wild bush really is directly cultivated in order to affect what was affecting us. You know, in the past it was infectious, now it's chronic, non-communicable, or if it was mothers. And then that brings it right back to a lot of what you were talking about, healing of the womb, the earth as the womb, women's practices, etc. So can you talk to us more about what the land showed you when you came, and maybe some of the inferences and energies that you're thinking, what the narrative of the land is being?
It's really interesting because indigenous is such a fraught thing. When I hear about indigeneity, I think to the Tainos, the Kalinago.
That's right.
And I forgot to establish that connection.
Correct.
So I want to take time to also establish that, because we have this misconception that prior to discovery, in quotations, that this land was not used. This land was cultivated. So when we in the West, we have this conditioning that nothing was here, then everything was here, then it went back to nothingness when the British cleared it in 1620s, 1630s for sugarcane. But we need to remember that we're also on indigenous ground.
That's right.
And that the seeds planted thousands of years ago lay fallow, and because of erosion, especially in the Scotland district, things happen, things begin to pop up. And I know that Barbados has 2 endemic species of plants, and a lot of the plants are also under the category of native species. And sometimes there's like difficulty in trying to negotiate how do we express it so that we know the difference, because language is a powerful thing. So when we got this land, and it was very bushy, overgrown, and in some ways I thought that we would inherit all of this forest, because Barbados is now within the Caribbean, I think the 3rd most deforested country. We have 2,000 acres of not even primary forest left. So this would be secondary forest, and that would be 4% of the island, which takes me back to, again, being very intentional with how we work. Within agriculture, you kind of just want to slash and burn, or you want to clear the land for food growth. You don't think about the clam and cherry, you don't think about the river tamarind, you don't think about the papagon or the Congo palm as being essential elements and essential compartments to revitalize the soil, because a lot of people look at these things as pests, especially the river tamarind, which we have probably about 4 million of here on the land. Once you scarify, then it propagates and it grows, and it's very hard to control. But on the plus side, the nitrogen fix. We would not be able to cultivate this land properly, organically, if we didn't have these nitrogen fixers. But
Speaking to the devil.
yes, yes, the Kowich is right here in our face.
Right by
and
the
River
River
Tamarind.
Right by the
So
River Tamarind,
there's
yes.
a wonderful battle happening here too, and always. So when we inherited the land, the medicine was flourishing. You
Yes.
have the ball bush, you have the cerasee,
Right.
you have
I see milkweed.
yes,
Right.
you have
Actually,
the
good.
milkweed.
We're both segmented. Let's see what we can see.
Yes, yes,
What's
absolutely.
right here in this sight line.
Well, I can tell you that Cersei, everyone knows Cersei, right? There is milkweed,
Yes.
and we see the castor bean plant along
Along
the riverbed. But what I would like to say, while we do our own investigation in this space, is this is as natural, right, as plant flora will be, and this is how it should be captured. We should understand that plants exist in an ecosystem, and we are a part of that ecosystem. Now, someone will say, why is it that cultivation in a natural sense like this flourishes while trying to develop pilots or miniature sections of this in a home garden will come under so much threat? But it goes back to one of the premises of plants and their bioconstituents, these phytochemicals that I mentioned earlier as the bioactive agents within plants, that you have primary and secondary metabolites. As I said, the primary metabolites of plants are essentially important for the development of that plant itself. But the secondary metabolites, these are compounds which allow the plant to coexist, right, within the ecosystem. Hence, you find that plants in a natural space like this will still be able to flourish, right, as opposed to trying to have transplanting in home gardens, etc., which will then come under threat by other
What we call
pests. That's right.
Yeah.
but they're just part of the ecosystem.
And it's interesting what you bring up, this kind of removing from context.
Yes.
You remove the medicinal plant, the wild plant from its context, because you have this need to see it elsewhere. So, we're in a colonized space, and we're technically speaking about decolonizing nature, about moving back to the origin, to the intention, to the actual knowledge of the plant. We don't sit with plants often. Of course, I'm Dr. Kohal. I know that it is your job and duty, and probably also your passion to do these types of investigations. But as a child, I grew up on Beckway. I was telling Aisha and the team earlier that we would cut pumpkin stems and make flutes and be inside nature. It was only as an adult, when you moved away, that this abstraction and this distance became such a reinforcement, and we've divorced ourselves so much that we think that we can actually go pull up something and replant it elsewhere, which is human ego.
That's right.
So a lot of it has to also do with the conditioning. Yes, we need to provide food for ourselves, for our families. I think within this COVID moment, the first month, everybody was baking and planting gardens. And me, I was like, wow, this is the revolution. This is why I quit my job. This is why I moved out of museum spaces to come back to the land. And then I had this anchoring and this reception and this reciprocity. But we need not to forget that this source is also about communing, that reestablished connection, because the indigenous people had it.
Yes.
Our ancestors absolutely had it,
Right.
because they needed to resist within the landscape in order to live. And a lot of the medicine, because medicine is also poison too, right? There's this double intention there, or this double meaning when we use the term, but we use it in safe quantities.
That's right.
So how does this medicine erupt to create something else for us, to create a kind of freedom, which is technically the ground that we're standing on? All of it has come through this quiet revolution.
That's right.
Of plant medicine.
We highlighted some elements of that earlier, and without trying to sound too academic, I identify compounds which are bioactive as drugs, right? Because you take a compound and it can effect a change in a living system. It is a drug. But when we speak about medicines, we're talking about the intent of the use of that drug. And medicines are intended to produce a desirous effect. right? So in terms of the adverse effects and the toxicities which are associated with medicine, note that it's the intention of the use. So while some of the plants may have compounds which might be considered toxic or may lead to other adverse effects, etc., it is the intention of the use of the drug or the plant which captures the plant or the drug as a medicine.
Is just molecular to exactly what you're doing with Sage Garden. It might look like a farm, it might look like permaculture, it might look like all of these things that we're talking about. It's the intention behind any and everything we do that can kill or cure.
That's right.
So we'll take a break now. Well, we're in the bush and we have two bush experts, and we have to start doing some identification, because you're like, but what is there and how can I use it? So we're gonna have a little bit of an exploratory exercise where we can identify some of these plants and have a conversation about the scientific and academic, as well as the ritual and spiritual and folk uses of them. And that's not a dichotomy. We're not setting them up as verses at all, because the first thing we had this conversation about was how these are all holistic ways of being and existing in this space. So, but because it's in my hand and because a COVID pandemic has lots of people talking about it, we call it milkweed in Barbados. And of course, there are many things that you can call milkweed. Dr. Cohol, why is milkweed so trending right now?
Well, so to build on what you said, Aisha, the botanical name of milkweed, or the scientific name of milkweed, goes by the name Chamaeaceae hirta. But we know it traditionally as milkweed in Barbados, and that is because of the extract of this plant. When you break it, right, you see a white sappy material exuding from the plant, hence milkweed. But it became very popular around this time during the space of COVID-19, because in Madagascar it was highlighted as having antiviral properties which could be used to treat COVID. And it became so topical in that part of the world that the WHO, the World Health Organization, actually supported the scientific exploration of this plant as an antiviral agent to treat COVID specifically. And they're actually considering moving extracts of this plant throughout the drug development pipeline, which we'd have touched on previously. Locally in Barbados, we use milkweed, or the sap or extract of milkweed, as a topical agent for treating topical conditions, such as fungal infections like ringworm, etc. But it's a very important plant. And again, this is another plant that you will see growing out in the wild. And don't make the mistake of calling it a wild bush or a wild plant, right? But again, it's a very important part of the ecosystem, but it has that very important use to us, which we should, of course, further explore.
Okay. And Holly, just a brief thing, but while we identified it, you said, oh, you've seen it in other uses.
Yes, I've seen it used in applications for spiritual baths and cleaning practices within Santeria.
Yes, and cleaning the energies.
Cleaning self, cleaning homes, cleaning spaces. Yeah, cleaning different environs.
So here, this plant, you have your layers, you have your levels, you have your multi-uses. And of course, that's the thing about this colonized space, is it's all of these weaving ins and outs of different traditions and people kind of coming together.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about this little section here is that we've identified so many medicinals in like a four foot area, and it's very complicated because they're almost strangling each other, but they've found a way to coexist.
That's right.
You know, the river tamarind is as I mentioned before, it's a great legume. People identify it as a pest within our local landscape because it proliferates so quickly.
Mayamasi.
Yes, but the wonderful thing about it is that if you develop enough shade on your property, it is shade intolerant. So you can actually kill it out by offering shade to it.
Thank you.
Yes, that's one point. Another point, don't pull it up because nitrogen fixes your soil. Of course, if you have several hundred, you can go ahead and remove, but it really adds to the renourishment of the soil. So this is why this area is so prolific as well, because the plants have found a way to establish balance. Dr. Kohal before was speaking about this interrelation, and oftentimes when we see plants, we just like see, you know, stem, trunk, flowers, etc. But there's this entire system underneath that we don't consider in terms of how they get nutrients, how they compete, and how they communicate.
That's right.
Now you've got
this is the clement cherry, which is also under the cooling herbs. One can drink this to sort of bring down heat in the body, but the most common way that I know how to use this plant, again, dovetails very well with COVID, in that the indigenous practice that I am studying and understudying, we use this in a spiritual bath to increase lung capacity, to really give the lungs more space and more room to free themselves up. I know that a lot of people have been under different kinds of stresses because of the economic strains, or, you know, the way of life has definitely our way of life has changed overnight. So this new normal hasn't really sunken in yet. So this is one of the plant allies that I use to bath with, and it's very simple. You make a bush bath, and you do that by putting it in a pot with other elements if you want to, other plant material. One plant that is very helpful in this regard would be the blue vervain. It's a nervine, which means that it also relaxes the body. It has like properties that are very similar to like lavender and chamomile, but people often think that, you know, these high foreign drugs are a lot better, or herbs or oils are a lot better than what we have within the landscape, and that is a complete misunderstanding of what we have. So we really need to resuscitate this knowledge, because it is vital to our survival, because there's so much of it. You don't have to spend money. All you have to do is go outside and wildcraft.
That's
Not
right.
steal,
That's
wildcraft.
But it's interesting that you mentioned.
Yes, I was
vervain.
actually going to throw it back to you, because of, you said you use it in a bath, and one of the things that we wanted to really nail down or concretize was stem, leaves, roots, 5, 7, how many? And yesterday previously you were talking about the difference between a decoction and an infusion.
That's right.
And that really, particularly with things that we ingest, we ought to do an infusion, which is boiling the water first and then steeping,
There you
compared to, but you were talking
Bringing
about
it
with
to
the bush
boil.
bath, but bringing it to a boil.
Yeah.
So with the vervain and the clement cherry for the bath, you're saying that boiling it is the better way to go. And you were going to talk about the vervain now.
Yes, well, I was highlighting the vervain, and I was highlighting vervain, you know, among, you know, the common list of medicinal plants which are used traditionally as bush teas or cooling teas of Barbados. And I'm happy that you mentioned the whole issue of preparation, especially for the bush teas, because I am often, you know, asked the question, Doc, how much is too much? And it's important for us to understand that, you know, within my discipline, within my science, we preach moderations, right? And in pharmacology, there's a very important concept called dose-response relationship. So we have to establish dose to response. So primarily for preparing plants for medicine, we always suggest moderations and start small and gradually build, right? And of course, observe the response towards the dose of the plant which is being used. So someone will ask, so Doc, how much do I start with? And if you're making a cooling tea, and again, my prescripted measure in terms of preparing cooling teas would be the infusion, is that you take roughly 3 to 4 leaves, right? And I suggest that in most instances, we may want to dry the leaves of the plant before you actually do the infusion. And why is it important to dry? Because the drying actually removes excess moisture, water from the plant material. So you're now able to concentrate the phytoconstituents of the plant much better. So the infusion is just like making tea at home. So it's the same process. When you're making tea at home, you take your tea bag, you put it in a cup, and you pour boiling water on top of it, and you make an infusion. There's this notion that, you know, the darker the concentrate, the better. And I just want to be mindful to our listeners, to our audience, our viewers, that boiling and getting a very concentrated herbal preparation doesn't necessarily mean the most beneficial. You're going to extract beneficial compounds, and there might be some compounds that are considered toxic that may be extracted as well. So moderation's at all time.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have to be very mindful of how much you use, which is why I'd like to also speak about how one goes about collecting medicine.
But can you? We have a great example here. Let's collect. Let's wildcraft some Cersei.
So wildcrafting is a term that the West came up with to feel a little bit better about picking,
going up
and
bush and picking,
and to be ethical. So when you get to any kind of plant, you want to acknowledge that the plant has medicine.
Yes.
So I always ask and then pick.
This is Cersei here.
This is Cersei. So you can just just pull it off.
It's a climber.
And you know it by the smell.
There you
Yes.
go. Yeah. Oh yes, good old Cersei.
Cannot miss that.
You can't miss Cersei. No.
And sorry, 1 second before you go on. If you get to another kind of tree, and let's say you're crafting leaves and the tree looks unhealthy or depleted, you don't want to take everything off of that tree, because you don't want to deplete the resource that the tree has.
That's right.
So you have to be very mindful when you're approaching these things that you don't, perpetuate the thing that we are trying to work against.
Which is this one-way extraction.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Again, we live in we say it's a system of mutual benefits, right? Plants were created not only as food but as medicines, but we have to do our part in nourishing the soil, nourishing the ecosystem to allow for the recycling of these very important plants. Now, Cersei is very important. This is one of the plants currently in my lab where we're investigating the anti-diabetic properties, right, of Cersei. Now, historically, Cersei has been used not only in Barbados, but in other Caribbean territories and even geographical locations outside of the Caribbean for managing, blood glucose. It is said that the Cersei has peptides, and this is some of the science coming out on Cersei, that it has peptides which are considered quite similar to indigenous compounds in our bodies called incretins. Incretins are important because they actually lead to the release of insulin from the pancreas. And as you know, persons who suffer from diabetes, they have great insufficiency in producing insulin from the pancreas. So type 1 diabetes is where the pancreas is not able to produce insulin, but type 2 diabetes is where we have some insulin resistance and also depleted insulin reserve due to the lack of insulin being produced. Now, we are investigating this plant because we believe that in type 2 diabetics primarily, we should be able to find a way to allow for extracts or phytocompounds from this plant to be able to improve insulin capacity and the insulin response within our type 2 diabetics. So this again is a very important and valuable plant. I know a lot of us know it, but I just want to reintroduce it to you in that space, which is the science coming together with the folklore to show the value and the benefit of these plants that we have grown locally here in Barbados.
And the way that I know this very, very bitter tea is from, it's an immune booster. What colloquially you're told is that it cleans the blood. So anytime you were feeling a cold, and we call everything a cold.
Yeah, anything come on.
I learned later meant, inflammation. So if you get cold in your foot, you get cold in your elbow, you get cold in your stomach.
That's right.
So I remember they're going, if you're getting a cold in your head, before it really hits you, you would this and anoint with especially shilling oil, but a really strong methylated oil in those areas, because you're like opening up the pores. But I'm not lying to you. Cold evenings in wintry countries, and you start to feel it coming on. You grab your Cersei bush bag. No, because
you would take it.
Jamaica makes tea,
of course,
in the box, and or come home and you infuse this. And if you drink that, I think it's also diuretic, so it sends you to the bathroom regularly, and you drink more water, and this will knock it out. So that was the use that I got from the mother and from the grandmother. And we used to have a bushman at the front of every Kaduma there, I don't
Mhm.
see him anymore,
Mm.
who would wrap himself in
Mhm.
vines,
Ah.
Corralito, but also in
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
And he would be at the front of the bands going down the way. And I don't know if that's connected to the garlanding that they do with this particular plant in West Africa. I never got an opportunity to speak to him, but yeah, I remember that guy who would be wrapped in bush and he would just be going down the road, Kaduma there, in front of everybody else.
And just to add to that, I just want to highlight that even though I call myself an academic or a scientist in the purest sense, but in order for science to continue to be infused within this rich history of the use of medicinal plants, we have to understand that there's not only the physical aspects that should be explored, but also the spiritual aspects. One of the things I can tell you for sure is that our ancestors, especially our West African ancestors, or persons who were brought from the west coast of Africa, that the use of plants wasn't only for physical ailments, but it was also for spiritual fortification as well. In fact, there was a belief system that the herb will work more so than understand the science of the constituents of the herb to be able to bring about the effects. So the mental components, the spiritual components, the physical components, and the cultural aspects within the society were important in this practice, right? In terms of not only understanding the medicinal benefits, but understanding why it was such an important aspect of day-to-day lives among our ancestors.
Yeah. And it's wonderful to see the knowledge coming back and or coming to the surface. And I'm not sure if it's because I'm in the chapter of my life that I'm in, where, you know, water seeks its own level and thus the people come to you. But it has had a resurgence within our local, you know, conversations. And I think that it is really something that's very important because, yes, you could use this in an abstract way because, you know, you grew up using it, but without the full understanding.
Background, that's right.
Yeah, but when you meet somebody and there's this engagement and you drill down into this, then you start to see the real potency. And for people who live in a Christian country, it's a little bit like having like bipolarism because you use all of these medicines and it's ritualized, but we don't have the language to speak about the ritual in conjunction with the bonds of Christianity. So when I have conversations with my mother and she's telling me about what she's using now during COVID, I'm like, but this is a big shift.
Yeah.
So we're also living in a moment where the temperature and the openness, the reception of this kind of medicine and these alternatives are actually starting to flourish. And the one thing that I would say is that we have to be very mindful about how we go about sharing our information and how we protect what we devise and discover.
Very
And of
much so.
course, I know within your profession, especially looking at what just happened in Madagascar with the WHO and COVID organics, there's a line. And which line do we thread when we're observing, you know, biodiversity in Barbados and not signing on to certain protocols and legislation, but yet we want to hold this knowledge and to own this knowledge and to capitalize on it, not in the full, you know, capital C type of way, but it's our medicine. And
That's right.
how could we use it to, you know, bring certain kinds of knowledge, not only here, but elsewhere, because this is powerful.
Yeah.
And we're not even speaking about geopolitical relations in the Caribbean, because this is the thing that binds us real close.
Literally and figuratively. Now, before we wrap, because those are entire series all on their own, we have one more plant. Well, we have multiple plants, but we have one more that we can talk about for its medicinal use, how it has been used traditionally, and perhaps if Dr. Kohal, if you're doing other things with it. We've got, this is the plant that if you leave a building or you leave a plot of land and you blink, you're going to get this.
It appears.
Castor oil.
Yes.
It seems to be embedded in the DNA of Barbadian soil.
Yes.
It's in town, it's in the country,
everywhere.
It's in your house if you leave your house for too long.
That's right. That's right.
So let's talk about this one.
So interestingly, and I'm going to start this story here, but castor oil is actually one of the herbs or extracts of castor oil is one of the elements or medicinal elements that we do teach in the formal setting in medicine, right? It is known for its laxative properties. You know,
Yes.
within the traditional setting, you know, I'm sure a lot of us grew up on taking teaspoons of castor oil, purge, right? Time for purging.
Or you're here.
Right? And a lot of us also know it, especially the women of our society, they would use it, you know, to help in the development and the health of their hair, right? Interestingly, castor oil became topical about, I would say, roughly 6 months ago, when I was a part of this very interesting Facebook chat, you know, about the use of castor oil within society. And I was asked about the toxicity related to castor oil. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but I'm sure you have heard about this this bioagent, which has been considered to be used in warfare, called ricin. But ricin actually comes from this plant, right? There's also ricinoleic acid, which has important contractile properties, right? And I'm not going to make that too scientific, but what I would like to say is that women who are pregnant or women who have just given birth may want to stay away from castor oil, right? You do not want to interfere or ingest castor oil because of these contractile properties. It can induce contractions and it could potentially bring about abortions. It's seen and considered abortifacient in pregnant women, right? So you may want to stay away from castor oil. And some persons would say, but doc, I probably can't take it as a purge, but I could probably use it in my hair. And the truth is this, there are various ways to apply medicine, right? And topical is one of those, right? Now, while topical may be safer than ingesting it orally, but again, I would like to preach a word of caution. Just stay away from it, because the minute doses that may be absorbed and eventually get into your bloodstream or systemic circulation might just be enough to lead to inappropriate contractile activity in your uterus, which would essentially bring about potentially adverse effects on your unborn child. So castor oil is very important. It's a purgative, it's a laxative, right? Persons use it to detox. You know, it's a part of that detox cocktail. But more so, it also has these very important toxic compounds, which, if not used appropriately, can become problematic.
Kill and cure.
That's right.
And it's interesting because of the curative aspects. It's an abortifacient for sure, and for women who are, it's a really interesting and complex plant. You know, poison, medicine,
and it's the seeds, it's the pods that you use for the laxative part, where you get
that's
the oil.
right, the oil. The oil.
Right, because we spoke with Dr. Richards earlier about the use of the leaf as a febrifuge, which is drawing the fever out of you and taking the inflammation out and joint pain.
Anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial as well.
Yes.
But for women who are suffering from fibroids or from cysts, oftentimes you would grind the leaves down or make it into a poultice and apply, and then apply the oil over the poultice, and then do a saran wrap and with a heating pad to bring the inflammation down. And so for some people it has been so successful that they're now walking around without pain, with reduced fibroids, etc. I'm not sure if it's connection to infertility and if it has had much success in terms of reversal or healing in that regard.
So we're gonna have to wrap, because we're looking here and we're seeing a million more. Just a quick word: there's some cowitch in the field, and I do know that that I've heard about research with the beans of the cowitch being used for things like asthma. So anti-inflammatory, but also dealing with the spasms that you get that close down.
That's right.
That the cowitch is
bronchodilation.
Yes, it's either a tea from the leaves or something. So there's medicine and there's food, and there's medicine for your mind, there's medicine for your body, there's medicine for your spirit, and there's medicine for the healing of communication, community, gender disparities, and
Well,
everything.
we have to think about all of these factors. We have to think about the gender factors in terms of use of medicine, and the castor oil plant was just one of those very important plants which show that there might be some sort of dimorphism in terms of the use of the plant among males and females. But the key thing that was highlighted in what we all mentioned about castor oil is that it is important for us to appreciate the parts of the plant and the benefits of using specific sections or parts of the plant. Because while the seeds of the castor oil plant, which essentially gives us that oil, may be toxic or may have toxic elements, we should also know that the leaf or the extracts of the leaf may not bear as much toxicity as the seeds, right? So it is important for us to understand parts, right? And again, dosing, moderations, as I preached earlier, right? Always in moderations. Infusion of dry leaves when possible. There are some indications where the undried parts of the plants are considered, especially when you're making poultices, etc. And we have to understand that there is science. And I mentioned this before, that the science of the use of the plants wasn't documented scientifically as we consider in the conventional space that we are in now. But our ancestors would have made their own scientific inferences by looking at observations over time. And they didn't only observe the use of the plants among themselves, but they looked at how the animals interact with the plants and how the plants was a part of the ecosystem, and how that information was captured, mentally recollected, to give advice and make recommendations about what is safe and what is efficacious. So that science still needs to be captured, and it still needs to be studied appropriately and utilized appropriately.
All right, guys. Thanks again. I appreciate you guys coming through again, man. You know, this information is really valuable, and it's good to know, you know, that people still sharing these information, learning about herbs. You know, like I always mention, man, the dosage is important. And that's what you hear the brother now was talking about. The dosage, because I remember my grandmother used to deal with dosage, not just drinking it, not just boiling it, not just eating it. She used to deal with dosage. There's a certain amount of dosage. And I also believe there's a spiritual connection between herbs. I really do. I think there's a way of handling herbs. There's a way of using herbs. There's a way of I really do believe that. But you know, we lost all that. We lost all that. So able to the man to still hear this valuable information. Yes, boy blue. It's always moderation. Yes, man. It's a blessing, man. It's a blessing. So this is why I got to shout them people out, and you know, keep shouting them out, because I think they're doing a spectacular job in what they're doing. This video is not mine, guys, but looking at the video and the information they give out, I just say, man, let me share this. Let me just run it. You know what I mean? But the channel is always there. You could go and check them out. NFC Barbados, you could always go and check them out and get these information. But thank you guys again for coming through, man. As always, appreciate you guys. Let me see. This was enlightening because we use these herbs for years but never understand the breakdown of it and its benefit. Definitely. You see, we didn't know, but our grandparents know. You know what I'm saying? Like my grandmother, she know, but she never really break down and tell you, well, all right, this is for this. She only tell you, oh, go run and bring this for me. Go bring that for me. They never really break it down to you that if they did do that, the dosage was a continue. We want to understand the dosage more. You know what I mean? So they had the information, but they never really pass it down. That's the problem. So we know We come now and we don't know. So now we just trying to use our own thing. That's why I always mention proceed proceed with cautious, man. Take as little and always take breaks. Yeah, you welcome, boy blue. You welcome. Yes, always take breaks. Don't go push too hard and take too much because you just never know. You know what I mean? Sometimes we learn too much of one thing is good for nothing. So little by little, it might work. You know what I'm saying? But as always, again, guys, thank you guys for coming through, man. I appreciate you guys. You guys have a blessed and wonderful weekend. Yes, yes, you know what I mean? They never passed it down. They had it. My grandmother had it. She was the nurse of the village. She was bringing back anybody. You know what I mean? You're healing, your belly hurt. You have a sprained foot. Ain't no hospital you going to. She the one walking on you, belly hurt, head, whatever. So they know. They know, but they just wasn't sharing that information. Yes, dosage is definitely important because some have tox definitely. And by you intaking all the toxin, it could mess you up. You know what I'm saying? All right, guys. Thank you guys as always, man. Peace and love and blessing. You guys have a wonderful night. Shout out Boy Blue. Shout out Fifi. Shout out OG Living Life and everybody who come to tonight. And we got to shout out NFC Barbados for this video. Blessing to them. Peace and love, guys. Thank you, guys. Have a blessed weekend.